Hey, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. I think we're going to have a phenomenal conversation today with a new friend that I think is going to be a deep dive into a subject that is often hard to talk about, but I also think it's a crux of having a good life, a thriving life. And this is the subject of giving. And my guest today, Larry Onan, is, I think, probably one of the preeminent experts in terms of not just this subject of giving, but the deeper question, which is what I really want to get at to, is why should we give? We hear so much that we should give. We hear so much about people who abuse the need to give. And so I want to kind of ask the hard questions as if I was a person who had no interest in giving and let you kind of tackle this for me with your wisdom. So I'm going to get into it, but let me give you just a little bit of background on Larry. Larry is a graduate of the University of Colorado. He and his wife, Pat, serve as full-time staff for Campus Crusade for Christ, which is a university Christian ministry, for over 18 years. And a lot of that time he spent in the development side, the fundraising side of Campus Crusade. These efforts were not small efforts. They were big efforts. They amounted to the raising of over $150 million for this worldwide Campus Crusade of Christ ministry. Amazing. In 1984, he joined Management Development Associates as a vice president of stewardship strategies, a deeper dive into this. And he's invested 30 years in private counseling and consulting of Christian ministries, helping them to implement stewardship-focused programs to help people raise money. And I think I should say raise money the right way from right motivation. And we'll probably get into that. And he stepped down from the full-time consulting in 2012, but continues to speak in the United States and abroad about lifestyle stewardship. And we're going to unpack that term also in our time together. So Larry's got a fascinating story. He's the author of 2 books, Giving Yourself Away and Intentional Living and Giving. And I also want to dive into that. So this subject might be something that you're thinking about. It may not be something that you're thinking about. But I want to encourage you to listen through all of this, because the giving of ourself, the intentional giving of ourself, almost over and above our resources, is, I think, at the foundation of a thriving, joy-filled, purpose-filled life. And I think Larry's going to be able to help us in that discussion a lot. So welcome, Larry, to Space for Life. I've been looking forward to our conversation and really hearing your wisdom on this.
Well, it's so good to be with you and join you and your crowd as you are helping people understand just what life's all about and how to live life. So that's very exciting.
Well, We're figuring it out together.
Well, you mentioned my background. I was born and raised in the western part of the state of Colorado. I'm a product of right after World War II. I was born in 1944. The war was over. Life was coming back. My dad became a itinerant church planter, with one church growing to about 300 to 400 people, but did many other churches. But I was raised in a cocoon of where the word giving was often used, but it was often used only to talk about money. And it was almost like the obligation of the preacher was to preach on this subject, to get the people to put money in the plate. And it was almost a distasteful idea. So stewardship in my growing up was, oh dear, Dad was coming after the offering plate, or there wasn't enough in the offering plate. And it was all about money. I didn't really think about it very much, but I did think about the frustrations that I saw in people growing up in my community they were not living fulfilled lives. They were living pretty defeated lives. They were in fear. They were in conflict with each other. I remember in one of the churches that Dad was a part of, a couple of women wouldn't speak to each other for 2 years because they disagreed on the color of the paint in the fellowship hall. So, I mean, it was really down to the really simple things. And as a preacher's kid, you just are kind of living as a fly on the wall. People don't even know what you're saying back and forth. And they don't know that this 10-year-old kid is processing this argument differently than how the argument may have been going on. I also discovered back in those days that you couldn't live the Christian life the way I wanted to live it. And I found there was a way to escape because my religious background was highly performance oriented. It was what you look like, how you walked, how you dressed, what you didn't say, what you did say. The theology, I wasn't too sure about. I never thought about theology very much. But I did know that life was a pretty big performance, and I didn't always like what I saw. And I tripped over theater, and I discovered you could play different roles for a short period of time and take on different personalities. And as I got into theater, I started having a real passion for the whole theater arts, the acting, the directing. And I knew I was going to end up on either Broadway or New York City. I just, Broadway or at least Hollywood, I'll put it that way. So I knew that was my goal. And I was at the University of Colorado actually majoring in theater when I had a real transformative life change through a couple of engineers of all people. I was in theater arts and they were in engineering school. But these two guys, in the few months before I met them, had really come to have a real relationship with, they called Jesus at the time. And I thought, how can you have a relationship with something that's so broad? I knew the name. It wasn't against me, but it was just these guys were different in how they carried their life. Well, I was attracted to that. And as I got into understanding what they were really talking about, and my faith became personal rather than religious, I wanted to get out of the university and get away from theater because now I could see that it was mostly a theater act that was going on, and I had to figure out how to escape. So I escaped by changing my major to secondary education as a school teacher, and theater arts was a part of that with English and diversified education. And I got out of school in 4 years, but that really was more of an escape tool. I chose then to go into ministry to help kids like myself, young kids in college. And that led me into a ministry for a couple of years that direction. But I didn't realize all these years that I was uniquely and gifted in certain ways. Everybody is uniquely gifted in certain ways. Everybody is uniquely different. Everybody's got a place. Now, I didn't see all of that. When you're growing up and you're living in real time, pretty soon that's kind of a blip on the screen. But I did see that what I was good at doing, even in the theater, was taking something from nothing, basically a script, and turning it within 6 to 8 weeks into a performance that would captivate audiences. And I was liking the directing more than I was liking the theater. Now, I enjoyed the acting, but it was the same idea. Is you took on another personality off of a book or a script, and you transformed that into something that people actually believed in for a 2-hour period.
Wow.
So I said, okay, that is what life is taking something from nothing and creating something out of it. And I started applying that in a more business sense. And for a number of years, I was in charge of the music ministry of the nonprofit that I was with, and I was putting groups together. I didn't enjoy singing in groups, although I could. I just felt like it was more fun to put them up, take an idea. We need a group for working with military people or international students or a rock band or a country band or a group for churches or whatever it was. And so I would create, and working with a team of people, we would create a concept and then develop from the concept a full-blown traveling team out there. And I didn't realize that those formulative days were the beginning of another journey that was going to come to me shortly. I'm the kind of a person, Tommy, that it takes an earthquake to usually move me around. So it takes a jar in my job description before I even move. Otherwise, I'll just stick with the job description because I can enjoy it. And I was really enjoying putting these groups together. We had 7 groups. Two of them were international, and the other ones were here in the United States. And during a performance of another kind, I learned that my job was curtailed as they announced a new director of the music organizational part of the ministry. And so I found myself without a job for 2 months. But in that process, I started to say, what do I do well? Who is Larry for real? How does he function? And then along came a particular need. And I started off a career of fund development by a guy that had a need of 28 boxes of pledge cards from a huge pledge that was made. I think it was about $1.9 million in pledges from mostly young adults. The boxes had been in a bathtub with a curtain pulled over the top of the bathtub in an old office that had been a bedroom that had been converted to an office. And I remember the day he took me into the guy that was in charge of that, and he said, I've got a problem here. Here's the boxes, and they're 90 days old. And they've not been opened since the pledges were made 90 days before. Do you think there's any value in these, or do I just throw them away? And another guy that was assigned to me 15 minutes before I went to that meeting, and I took those 28 boxes and said, what in the world do we do with this? And is there any value in what we can do to stimulate the fulfillment of that pledge? That was pure fund development. Fund development is an exchange. I give you something, you give me something. You make me happy, I make you happy, we're both happy. But there's usually something that's exchanging back and forth. In other words, I'll go play golf with you for 6 hours, and I'll give you a gift of X dollars to play golf, and I'm happy, and you're happy with my money, and I got a good day of golf in. That's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's exchanging. And most of even fundraising today is an exchange. You'll get direct mail in the mail, and it'll say, for doing this today, we'll send you a T-shirt, or we'll send you a blanket, or we'll do something in exchange for your gift. You're going to get something else that we think is of greater value than maybe your gift. That is fundraising. I'm not saying it's sinful. I'm just saying that's what it is. It's always exchange. Yeah. And for the first few years, I was learning how to make exchanges work, and I was doing a good job at it. But then I went into a meeting, Tommy. I didn't really belong there, but I had enough success that somebody invited me, and I ended up in a room where they were talking about a very substantial, large funding campaign. And the consultants that day said, you will never be able to achieve your goal unless you begin teaching what was called lifestyle stewardship. And nobody in the room of leaders had a clue what these consultants were talking about. And they said, no, you got to help people realize that they are simply managing the affairs of somebody else, and they are responsible to the somebody else. And if you don't teach lifestyle stewardship in going for your goal, you're going to make a lot of other people upset because they're going to see you stealing their donors. If you open up the gates broader and create 50 acres to farm instead of 5 acres, people are going to be thanking you for helping many more people give. Well, the ministry I was with was not interested in starting a new ministry of any kind. And yet the consultants were very firm on that this is key to making this work. And so somebody in the room said, well, Larry's had some success already in doing some of this. Let's assign that job off to Larry and let him come back and tell us what our lifestyle stewardship is all about. I wrote down.
What a nice gift for you.
I wrote down on a pad, figure out what lifestyle stewardship is. That was my headline. And I still remember the bottom of the page. I wrote myself a personal note. Larry, you have the freedom to fail. Because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't even know what the words fully meant. What had happened in the meeting is the recommendation to assign it to me got us off the topic so they could have other discussions.
So that was the beginning. Back up. There's just so many fascinating little pieces to this story so far. I think one of the things that at least I hear is the whole direction of your life turned or pivoted on a closed door. You know,
It was a slam door, and then it was I was out of business, and then I was back in business and didn't have a clue what I was doing.
Yeah. And so I think that so many people, I mean, I've certainly heard this, when a door is closed on them, particularly when it's slammed on them, it's received as devastating,
That's right.
humiliating, difficult. And yet your story, as well as so many that I've heard, that's often when the biggest, most important good things happen in our life, is when those doors are slammed, because as you said, you might not have ever moved otherwise.
I'm a big one, Tommy, for the sovereignty of God playing in the middle of things.
Yeah.
And I don't even understand how this all works, but I do know that a slam door or a jar in your lifestyle is maybe the beginning of something that you never dreamed was going to come your direction. And
Yeah.
if
And
you're
how
open to receiving that, you could be very shocked by what comes as a result.
exactly how much of life would look differently if every time we experience one of those slam doors or jar in a lifestyle, we immediately went to, okay, something is good is on the horizon. I mean, not as a Pollyanna optimism, but as a belief, as you say, in the sovereignty of God, that he's doing something, he's acting.
Well, what happened to me that day is I wrote it down. The whole conversation moved, and I'm thinking, I didn't realize that was a game changer that day. I just thought, okay, it's another assignment, and I got to be responsible. Now, I'm very big on strength finders and other ways of understanding who I am as a person.
Right.
And one of the things in my highest level of strengths is responsibility. It's just been a part of my life since I was 2 and 3 years of age. If I say I'm going to do it, I feel like I got to go do it. So I agreed that I would do it that day, and I didn't realize how that was going to bug me for the next 60 days. And it was probably 60 days later that I said, I need to spend some time figuring out on what I was told I needed to do. Nobody was asking me. I wasn't being bugged by the people in the room. That was a tactic to get this subject off the table and into some other things. But I thought, well, who in around me? And by that time, I was developing a department of people working with me, a number of young guys and gals. And so I brought together my leadership team of 5 or 6 of them, and I assigned 3 of them to work with me in this process. And we started working on what in the world did we get ourselves into, and what does lifestyle stewardship means? And I would say everybody in the room thought stewardship equaled money. You just write down the word stewardship, you write down the word money, that's what it is. We got into this, and from a biblical point of view, stewardship has really very little to do about money. It's about your life. Being a steward is one who manages the affairs of somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means. So if you go into the accounting world, the accountant is the one that manages the money. That's the steward. If you look at Jesus's disciples, there was a guy named Judas.
Right.
He didn't end up well, but he was the money maker. He was the money changer. He was controlling the money. He was the CPA of the nonprofit, if you want to think about Jesus and his 12 disciples that way. He wasn't the most trustworthy one when it comes down to the story, because we know what happened to him, but that's what he was doing. He was a steward for the rest of them. They all entrusted him with resources. But resources is only one aspect. A steward could be the one that's managing in the Dark Ages, the steward was the one who manages the entire household, the property of a wealthy landlord. And it was everything: the people, the property, the money, the management, the parties that they would have. Everything fell under the responsibility of the steward, and he was working on behalf of the owner. So that really started to shake us up, is that a lifestyle of stewardship is not a lifestyle of just giving money. A lifestyle of stewardship is realizing somebody else owns it all to begin with, and you own absolutely nothing. In the state of California, I own a house, I own an SUV, I own clothes in my closet. I've got stuff around here. And we even say it's my stuff. I mean, we use that word cash. But my stuff is not my stuff. I don't own a house. I don't own a car. I don't own clothes. I'm entrusted with things that I can enjoy, but they're not really mine because they were entrusted to me, not given to me and signed off. Now I'm also given resources, to live on. And I in retirement, I have income streams, but the income is really from my Heavenly Father, not from what I did before. It is income that I am still responsible for entrusting. Every year when I do my income tax, I have to sign up for being audited. And the number one reason is I give too much away because I like to give. But they say, you better do this because that's a red flag in the system of the IRS that people are supposed to be stingy.
Yeah.
So if you exceed that, then they're going to be asking questions. So what are you doing with it? Now, I've never been audited, but I pay for the help because I know in my stewardship, I could be asked the question.
Yeah. I think one of the difficulties that I sense in discussions about stewardship is this idea of us being stewards of something. That is, that these things don't belong to us, that they ultimately belong to God first, and we're just stewards of them. That actually kind of grates on a lot of people because they think, I mean, let's take so many entrepreneurs that are out there, but it's not just entrepreneurs. They think, well, I worked really hard for this. I mean, I'm happy to give away some portion of it, but don't go telling me that it's not mine, that this all belongs to God. I mean, I worked hard for this. And there is this mindset, which I think is very American in a lot of senses, that, no, these things are mine. I might give a little bit of it, but, don't tell me what to do with my stuff. That's my right. And so this whole idea at the core of stewardship kind of hits right up against our.
Well, it hits up there, Tommy, because we are basically selfish people and we want it. Now you discover where this comes into play is in the book of Genesis, the Pentateuch. Chapter 2 of Genesis is a very interesting story. Adam and Eve were there. They were in the garden, and this was not a backyard garden. This is the size of Rhode Island. I mean, the property size is huge, and it was never given to them. It was given in trust to them. And the basic request was, take care of my stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'll even let you name the animals. And you can live here and enjoy all the benefits of it, but I'm not giving it to you. I'm entrusting it to your care as a steward. So in Genesis 2, there was a principle of, I own it all, but I'm letting you have a lot of say in what we do. And I want you to take good care of my stuff. Now, in Genesis 2, we find out there was a little different twist on it. There was a visitor to the garden, and the selfishness of the individual came into play. And it started to say, and I am smarter than who made it all. I can make better decisions. I know he said there's boundaries, but I don't want to obey the boundaries. I'm going to go ahead and help myself to do what I want to do. And the old song from the crooner of the years gone by, I did it my way, came into play. That was Genesis 2. That's not the old crooner.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that the Olympics, the last song that was sung at the Olympics, closing of the Olympics, was the song I Did It My Way by some famous artist. And I'm thinking, okay, I know what they're getting at here. The Olympics people work hard to do their thing to win. I understand that they're using their skill, but how sad it is that the whole perception is life is doing it my way.
Right.
And I think it's because we have the wrong mindset on where it comes from. We start thinking people is stealing my stuff.
Right.
Now, I want to be a good steward, so I don't want you coming stealing from me. It's my responsibility to care for it. I think even in the green language of our culture today, there is a very important aspect of stewardship that's forgotten. We are responsible to take care of creation. Let's don't get stupid about this and start just destroying it. When I go hiking into the hills of Southern California, the deserts, I find trash all over the place. And what that tells me over and over is somebody was so selfish that they left their bottle or they left their trash. They didn't care to pick up what they left behind. That's being very selfish. Now that's, I'm not big on the green. I'm big on being a good steward of what we were entrusted with. It's at all levels we think about it.
Yeah. So unpack that a little bit further because, this lifestyle stewardship that you're talking about, if we were to take money out of the equation just for a minute so we can get down to the root of this, what do you see as like the most significant issues of our day in terms of being lifestyle stewards outside of our money?
We are basically possessive, self-centered people. So when I see a bottle on my hike yesterday, I did a walk through just a couple miles away from my place. I was picking up bottles and a tin can and a wrapper of somebody else. Somebody else didn't care if they were messing up the environment. They were self-centered and they didn't care. And they were possessive. And the thought of anybody else being bothered by what they tossed into the weeds was just evidence of selfishness.
Okay.
Because they could have carried it home and thrown it away in a trash can.
Right.
Now, that person may have been a really strong fighter for the green agenda today. But at the time of the walk, they threw a bottle away. Somebody else threw a wrapper away. There was a cigarette butt laying in the weeds. It was just evidence that we are full of ourselves.
So regardless of where we're coming from politically in terms of kind of the environment, it is an issue. It should be an issue that we take care of.
It was an issue. It was an issue to God long before there was ever even green anything.
Yeah.
Take care of my stuff. That was the essence of Genesis 2.
Okay. So what other areas do you see this kind of really playing out these days?
Well, it plays out in our daily life in that we will ignore opportunities to help others because it does not fit our agenda and our lifestyle. There may be now a prudent good steward. For instance, as a good steward, I won't give to panhandlers on ramps on the freeway. Some people have $10 they carry in their pocket and they drop $1 here and $1 there because to me they're relieving guilt.
Right.
The way I really help that person is to get him to a place or her to a place where they can get honest to goodness help and relieve a bad habit or a lifestyle or whatever it is. That doesn't mean I got to go around and give to everything. In fact, the steward is responsible, so I've got to think twice. I'm a bad steward if I just give him $1 because I released my guilt. He's got enough money to go buy some more alcohol, or she's got more money to do something else, and we're relieved from it for that moment, but we haven't solved anything.
Right.
So I think our whole life is about possessions and me and what do I get out of life. And we're living in a depressed, fearful state of our culture, even polarized politically over issues of this nature. Whereas God says, I never intended for you to go at it this way. I intended for you to enjoy life in abundance because I'm providing you what you need. And we do. And I think the sad part to me is that in our culture today, God belongs in a church chancel. Let's leave him up there where he's safe. And we're going to leave this building and we're going to do our own thing as if God had nothing to do with anything that we do today. I just think that we have forgotten the roots of what put us here in the first place.
Right.
And to me, that's the sad part of where people are living. They are clueless that they can live a thriving life differently than what they're living.
Yeah. And I see that playing itself out so specifically and tangibly in the area of giving. And it raises the question for me, because I think that there's this two sides of a coin that for many people, if not most people, we give out of guilt. Just like you said, we give because we're supposed to be giving. We might even give because we know we've been given a lot and blessed with a lot, but we still, the core motivation behind the giving is we feel guilty if we didn't give. Then on the other side is, I think, a different way of seeing things, which I think is the way it's meant to be. And that's that we give out of joy. We give out of gratitude. We give because we wouldn't even think otherwise. So if we just guess that the majority of the people fall into this guilt category, and I've fallen into the guilt category so many times, I feel that every time I go past a panhandler. How do we transition from guilt in giving to joy in giving? That's a hard question.
The Apostle Paul was writing to a group of people in Corinth in the first century. And he said, I don't want you to give grudgingly or of necessity. If you're giving that way, I don't really want your money. It says, because God loves a cheerful giver. We've heard that term over and over. It's one of the great verses out of scripture that's taken completely out of context, because we hear the only last phrase of what Paul is saying. God loves a cheerful giver. Well, I got into that when I was doing this study of what in the world is lifestyle stewardship. The word cheerful is in the Greek, it's the word hilaros. Hilaros means to cause to shine like the sun. How in the world does God love a cheerful giver? What is he saying there? And he's basically saying to the writers, he said, look, God doesn't need your money. In fact, in Deuteronomy, it's interesting that when God was giving directions to the Israelites, he said, I don't need your money, because he was giving them instructions on tithing in the Old Testament. This is nothing, but he says, I don't need your tithes, but I need you to remember to keep me first in all things. So I'm giving you this directive so that you learn to keep me first. Now,
wow, that's a different perspective. That's a different perspective.
He said, this is not for my benefit. I am not starving. I've got an abundance of everything. I created it all. I don't need your money, but you need to be giving so that you remember who's in charge of things, and that's me. Now, the word hilaros, let's come back to that a second. To cause to shine like the sun, you got to think, okay, what does the sun do? Well, we're benefactors of the sun today. It'll be 80 degrees. It's bright and sunny in Southern California. It's probably nice where you're at too as well, Tommy. And we're benefiting because at a perfect place in the universe, a sun, a star, a ball of fire is giving off heat and light. It's all it can do. In fact, we have trouble with the sun when it has sunstorms and gives us too much heat and too much light. It can blow out everything we've got electronically. When it's out of balance, as we would call it, out of balance with huge sunstorms, they say, watch out for your electronics in this next week because of sunstorms. What's going on? There's so much activity in that hot bottle of fire that it's affecting us differently than we're used to. But when Paul wrote, God loves a hilarious giver, and that's the way we could better translation hilarious, and that's the word hilaros, cause to shine like the sun. The sun is to give off heat and give off light. It's radiant, something that we need. So God wants us to do what he has done. And it says God loves to give. God gave everything in Genesis 1. God gave the son. I mean, you find give by God all the time. God is saying, my character is to be a giver. I want you to be a character following my example and be a giver. And I need to give as a part of who I am. I want you to be able to give as a part of who you are. So God loves a hilarious giver, not one that's rolling in the aisle laughing, but one that's doing by necessity what that we were created to do. We were created to be generous with everybody around us. It was
It's almost
God's
like
people.
it's almost like it's saying at the root of, if you want a hilarious life, if you want a life that's just like over the top with just wild hilarity, then the root of that is giving. Whereas
Is generosity.
that's a totally different feel than cheerful giver. We think of cheerful as, someone who has just a very slight smile on their face.
Yes. In fact, probably the saddest time in most church services is when they're taking an offering.
Yeah.
You reach into your wallet, you take it out, you really don't want to give it. You're thinking, well, let's see. I went to that concert last week with Swift. That cost us so much money. I should maybe I put half of what I put in on the concert that I went to. And I want to help the church out a little bit. I mean, we do it begrudgingly of necessity, even though we may not be angry about it. It really is not a lot of joyfulness. I just want people to enjoy giving whatever God has entrusted to them to help bless the needs of others. The principle behind it is God gives to people and people give to people. And if everybody is receiving from God and giving to everybody else, we're all living in abundance. And we're all living in great generosity. It's when we are selfish with ourselves and not helping others. I'm not talking about the entitlement side, and I'm not talking about the panhandler. I mean, there's other conditions that make that up. But if we were all doing the same thing, we would be having a phenomenally generous lifestyle together. I think the perfect plan was for us to be generous in all things. And just because God's generous in all things, he wanted us to, when we talk about God's character, we're not talking about a body walking around on earth, although that's one form. We're talking about a character of generosity that makes everything else possible. And so that is the lifestyle. Stewardship is, okay, that's who I am. I really am entrusted by my Creator. And one of my responsibilities is to do what he does well, and that's give. Now, there's other principles behind that too. I need to know how to ask. I can ask in prayer. I can ask you, Tommy, for help me. I think asking is very critical to the process of giving. 3 months ago, I spoke in a men's breakfast, and there was about 35 men there. And as I was picking up my stuff and getting ready to leave, most of the men left at the end of the breakfast. I was speaker, and I had a few things, and I was talking to somebody, and then I looked around the room, and there was two guys picking up everything that was left behind. And there was one or two women that had come out from the kitchen, and they were helping clean up. That's what you would call the clean crew. And I thought, there's 2 people or 3 people doing all the work. And if somebody had said 5 minutes before or 10 minutes before you leave, would you help us clean up the tables, do this and do that? If they had asked, 10 to 15 of the men would have stuck around to help them do what they were doing by themselves. But we are so dense that we don't think if they don't ask, they don't have any need. All they would have said, before you leave, help us do this, and we can all be out here in 15 minutes. Everybody would have stepped in to help do something appropriately.
Sure, but asking puts a person in a position of humility because they're in need, and that's an uncomfortable thing. I would rather give any day than ask for someone to give to me.
Yeah, and then Tommy, that's what we got to learn to do, because part of asking is also knowing how to communicate with one another.
Yeah.
But I think God wants us to learn how to ask him. We call that prayer in the theological sense, but we're asking each other. So when we take the initiative to say, could you help me do X? Could you help me do Y? You're really good at this. Could you could I count on you? I rarely get no's.
Yeah.
But if I don't ask, I get no by default.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
no one thought I needed it.
Well, in our conversation just before we started recording, you made a statement that I also thought was interesting related to this. You talked about, some people that you have come across over the years who are big, big givers, people giving $1 million who are still not happy because giving perhaps in their situation, I'm maybe putting words into your mouth, giving is only about their money and not about their lives and their talents and their serving one another. And so they become to think that as long as I give my money, then I've done my part, and then there's no joy to it. So we can get the giving wrong in so many different ways.
I think of a guy when you're talking that way. He was a guy that he was probably at 45 or 50 when I met him. So this happened within 10 years before I met him. And he was religious. He had a degree of faith. He was attending a pretty active church. He had been pressed by the church. They were building an educational center, and his family had gone to that church. And this is in the Midwest. And so they came to him. He was the oldest one of the family. And they said, your folks built this and they did this and they were very good. And his business was well known in the community. So everybody tapped him for money. And he gave a significant gift. The actual education wing that they built for the church is named after the family, a naming gift. That's usually part of the deal. And so he had done this and probably spent a couple $1 million on that building and the time. And he commented because he was really starting to understand personal faith for the first time. He had been very religious, but personal faith was a new thing. And he was in a Bible study with a group of guys that were peers. And he said, what's happened to me in the last 3 months is so significant, for now I understand I'm not being religious anymore. I have a walk of faith. But he says, I get more joy of sitting here having breakfast with you guys than seeing the building dedicated 3 years ago to my parents. Because we gave the money and I made sure they had the money, but I didn't give it with any joy because I was obligated out of the system to do so. And he says, now I can look back and say there wasn't a lot of joy there, but I should be thankful that I could do it anyway. But he was looking back at the opportunity after the fact. All the time that they were after him, he was thinking, this is not really what I want to do with my money. And I don't even know my parents want me to do it, but the pressure is so great that I'm doing it anyway. And so he gave it grudgingly of necessity, $2 million, he mentioned. Now, there may have been a few more dollars that needed to be raised for furniture and stuff like that, and other people were involved, but he was the pace-setting gift for that particular building. That's a really sad way to live when you're giving that kind of money. But I also run to just the opposite. A few years ago, I was teaching this kind of content in a seminar environment for a weekend, and a guy had just retired. He was all excited. He was probably in his early 60s, and he'd sold his business for a very significant amount of money. And we were doing a 5-hour seminar on lifestyle stewardship. At the end of the seminar that day, he came up and he said, I came out here thinking I was retiring to do what I've always wanted to do, and that's to go into helping other business people and blah. He was describing what he wanted to do. But he says, today I realized that God had blessed me to make money and manage people. And I'm going to go back into business so I can manage money and manage people and make money and be the generosity of what I was not when I was doing this, trying the other route.
Yeah. Wow.
And so he, instead of going into what he would call full-time retirement work, he went back and started a new business. And within 5 years, he gave over $4 million from that business to enterprises around the world that he was really interested in. Then he sold it again after about 10 years into it. And then he says, now I do want to spend 10 years in just volunteer ministry. But he chose to do something because he said, I realized at that time that my stewardship ability was to do things that a lot of people can't do. And I would be wasting my stewardship to not use the investment proceeds, start a whole new business, and become generous that I'd never done before. He was generous before, right, but now he was doing it with a purpose. I think that's when we know what we're intentionally doing, it makes a world of difference. Every kid that I know of growing up would go to the carnivals and be in the bumper cars. And these are those cars that were run by electric power, and you were just slamming each other all over the place, an old carnival ride. But it was really how we can push a person out of commission by bumping them in the other car. I think maybe many people are looking at life as almost of a bumper car. How can I push somebody else out so I can get ahead?
Yeah.
And life is not a bumper car experience. If you're not being intentional in what you're doing every day, you're going to miss the joy of what you were made to do in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think about the parable of the talents and people with 1, 2, 5 talents, and the reward from the master was the same for each of the ones who invested. And I think it's just so interesting that it says, enter into the joy of a master, that's what it's about. It's about joy. It's, maybe that can't be the initial motivation, but it's always what is the back end of the right kind of giving.
I think the motivation, you're talking about another principle when you talk about the laws of the harvest. The Apostle Paul wrote quite a bit about that. And basically in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, he writes about farming, whole 2 chapters about farming and what happens. Because the people understood farming. They knew the process behind it. The law of the harvest says, I'm going to do my very best to reap abundant harvest so I can help others. That was the law of the harvest. It wasn't, the farmer never went on vacation right as the harvest was due. He may have gone on vacation after it came in, but his goal was to bring in the harvest.
Right.
And so and you're starting to realize that's what you're up to, it's going to make a big difference to how you even invest your time and your resources to make that happen. You mentioned the talents. Well, there was one guy that got the bad end of the deal because he went and buried it. He didn't throw it away, but he did not invest it. He was not a good steward, preparing for the owner to come back and see how he was doing.
Yeah.
And so he was punished for his lack of stewardship. The rest of them were saying, you tried it. Even the master did not mind if they failed a little bit, but they were putting it to work trying to make a profit. The farmer is wasting corn and seed with the anticipation that the work effort is going to create an abundant harvest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think if we're looking at even that part of it, saying, okay, I've got to be really wise in what I do today, because this is going to make a big difference on the outcome. And I think many people don't think about the outcome. They're in the bumper cars. The outcome is, I placed you here to be effective for me. How are you going to be effective? And I love the people. I've dealt with many people that are very generous with very, very large gifts. And the generosity also brings a lot of responsibility. So that comes into accountability. The steward is not finished with his accountability just because he gives the money away. Because the money is still, it was entrusted to him, and he may have transferred the wealth, but it's really appropriate for the steward to be asking the hard questions on the one that's the receiver. What's your rate of return? How are you really doing with this? Tell me stories that come out of this. That's one reason I don't like giving to panhandlers. I never know. There's no way to track the outcome.
Right.
What did the dollar buy?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a spirit out there of saying, I am responsible for this. There's a fella, he's not a U.S. citizen, but he picked up on the concept of this 25 years ago, and he had a very large business in a neighboring country. And he knew that they were generating phenomenal income. And he set a goal of giving $100 million away. And he exceeded that, and he was working on his second 100 million when he died. And in that second 100 million, the family set up a family trust. So the proceeds of the business would continue to fund a trust that the family can continue to give away. They have taken very seriously the ability to make money really never comes to them. They're just responsible for the redistribution of what is there.
Okay.
And he said, he commented one time, being a good steward is a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
Because I got this, and he says it's difficult because sometimes I got to say no to nice things that I do not see producing a return.
Hmm.
And so I think that's the downside of being a serious steward, is not just passing it on and forgetting it, but living with the a reality that God's got an abundance of stuff to give. And if he can trust you with an abundance, you may get abundance, but you may not get any money. You may just have better use of your time. You may be able to use your talents. There's at least 100 things you can give away without ever touching money. Now, I know people often think, well, this is about stewardship, so it's got to be money. Well, that's one expression, but remember the Deuteronomy story. I'm asking you to give your money so you remember who's in charge of everything.
Yeah.
And we're not generous in giving our money. We will forget who's in charge, and we will end up trying to do it ourselves. We just think we did.
So for all the people listening to this podcast, and I think there's a really wide, diverse range of people listening to the podcast. And I know so many people, the majority of people, in our world, even more so than our country, are living paycheck to paycheck. They're tight. They don't see room, and there's a feeling like I've got to be careful with all of my things, my time, my money, the whole thing. So if someone is at the beginning of this journey that we're talking about, this journey of lifestyle stewardship, this journey of intentional living and giving, right at the beginning of it, what would be the first thing that you would encourage that person to do? The first baby step along the way to moving in this direction?
Well, to me, the baby step is saying, I've been thinking wrong and I'm sorry. And I want to give myself to you, God. I want you to start showing me how I can live off of your possessions, not mine. I want to be a part of your plan. In the book, I call it an authorized wealth distributor. And I go into a job description. The title is authorized wealth distributor, but it's basically your job description. It was Adam and Eve's job description. Now, it wasn't written in scripture. I kind of created it in that regard, but it's still, what were they doing? What were they called to do in those early days? The Old Testament is full of examples of people blowing it, with a number of people that were also good at it. So you see faithfulness of the patriarchs and different things. But I think the person's got to say, I want to reset the clock, push the button on reset and say, I've been doing this by myself. I want to do this under your oversight. Now teach me how to be a good steward. It took me a while.
Mindset.
The mindset. I'm changing my mindset from it's all about me to it's really all about you. Now,
that's a gigantic baby step.
But it's the step that says, I think a lot of times we think of things like depression and fear. We have medical terms for all those things today. But when you look at scripture, all those negatives, those dark things are falling short. They're called sin. I just need to come to grips with the fact that I've been on the wrong track. Can I get over on the right track? Now, I'm not saying that getting on the right track is going to be an easy ride. I think many people think that going someplace is linear. It's like flying in an airplane. If I fly to your city today from Ontario, California, we're going to fly straight to Denver, and then I'm going to catch another flight and fly straight to Richmond. Okay, I can do that, but life is not linear. It's just not the straight line. Every life is full of curves, and those curves are what help you grow. That's strengthening your faith muscle in a sense. Some years ago, my wife died of a glioblastoma brain tumor. Well, that was a curve I was not expecting. I don't really like the idea of her doing that, but when my decision was, I need to accept this, and how can you accept it? They would say. I said, I accept the fact that she changed addresses. That's all she did. what I need to do now is accept the fact that I've still got more curves to take because I'm still living.
Right.
So it was a choice that I made. I used the word on the book, intentional living and giving, because I believe that we've got to reset our reset button to intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to be intentional, today I will wake up saying, what do you want me to do today? How are you going to use this day to help me understand more about you? How can I help somebody else? How can I ask somebody else to, when I ask you, I'm doing something for you, not to you. I think I'm draining you of something. No, I'm asking you to put your self-worth to work to help me. I'm asking you to give. When I ask you to do something,
Right.
I'm asking you to give.
Yeah.
So I'm setting my mindset to make a choice that I'm going to be intentional on doing life rather than creating it as a mistake. And I just ended up here as a big blob. No, there's no blob
Right.
to this. This is all intentional.
Well, and that's a great way to kind of frame this as we close up, that, it is about intentionality and choosing a path of giving, out of joy instead of obligation, and reframing that we only give that which has been given to us, So it's important. Because it reaches into every area of our life,
Every area of your life.
every
And,
area of our life.
and I think people sometimes think that if they give away, they're going to lose.
Yeah.
I think of it like God has got a coffee pot full to the brim, and I got a cup. And God, first of all, is not going to waste anything. So he fills my cup to the brim, and then he stops pouring until I do something with what's in the cup that he just gave me.
Yeah.
When I redistribute that and I utilize that as he intended, then what's God got in the coffee pot for me? More. God
Yeah.
isn't a God. The principle behind it is God has got an exceedingly abundant amount of things to give to us in all kinds of areas at the point of our need, not the point of our want. We may want things, but God says, I'm here to supply all your needs, and I'm going to throw in some of your wants just because I love you so much.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times we think that God has got limited supply and we've got to hold on to everything. And I would venture to say that once you release that to whatever the need is, if it's money or if it's the time you put into somebody's life, or it's a smile, or it's a plate of cookies next door to a person that's lonely. I mean, there are so many ways. If we just think about, I think everybody listening could think of 5 ways that I could give in the next 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Just by being intentional on what I'm doing. And you will find at the end of that day, you've got new joy and refinement and excitement about life that you did not have by being selfish and stingy for the next 4 hours.
Yep, absolutely.
So I'm just trying to reprogram the thinking. And I know there's a lot of spiritual dynamic to it, but there's some very practical things here. In fact, when I wrote the book, the first 9 chapters is in the Christian world, we call it theology. It's 9 chapters covering the 5 key principles of being an authorized wealth distributor. Okay, the next 9 chapters are about the practicality of living that life every day.
Mm-hmm.
How you can be, the concern about deception moving in and taking over your thinking, the concept of indifference and how that keeps you from experiencing blessing. The practicalities of making wise decisions and how you're really going to give and how you say no. Because a good steward's not going to say yes to everything. A good steward is going to evaluate. And then what's the objective evaluation before you make a decision to give? I think people are saying no sometimes without thinking, and they're sometimes saying yes without thinking.
Absolutely.
And so the practicality is I can use this as a roadmap to get on this track of being intentional and living my life today and giving whatever's been blessed and given to me to give to others. Because I know that as soon as I give it, I'm going to be giving, more is going to be coming to me. And the more you give, the more you're going to receive. That's not an outline to get.
Yeah.
And there's theology out there that says get. That's what you got to do. You got to give it now, and you're going to get it. No, that's theology deception.
Yeah.
You give to get to give to get to give to get to. It's a cycle.
Right.
It just keeps on working on you. And when we seeing that, man, life becomes a blessing. And the essence of why I wrote the book was just to get this into the younger generation. I mean, the older generation would identify with it, but I thought it's time to come out with something that's new and fresh for the millennials and the Z generation that may not fully understand this. So the spectrum, I don't care how old you are, 20 to 90, there's something there for you.
Right.
And you can thrive no matter where you're at in life. And you will not be thriving if you are thinking selfishly.
That's great.
You won't be doing it. You'll be pretty much miserable.
So how can people get in touch with you, get to Intentional Living and Giving, the book, if they want to?
Well, if they want to get the book, I would recommend you can get it from my website, Larry at LarryO'Nan.com.
Okay.
It's Irish looking, but when it comes to, they don't like characters in some things. So it's ONAN, Larry, ONAN.
Okay.
You can't put the apostrophe in. They won't allow that. But that's one way. And the book is available there. But they can go to Amazon. They go to Barnes & Noble. They can go to any bookstore that carries any book can get the book for them. Okay. And you just think about intentional living and giving. That's what I want to do. And you'll find the book. And then that becomes a handbook to help you figure this stuff out.
Well, great. Well, I'll look forward to reading all about that.
If you've got an audience person out there that wants to write me and ask me a question, I mean, it's Larry at LarryO'Nan.com. It's just that's it. So I'm
ONAN.
ONAN.
And we'll have all that in the show notes. So
yeah, it's pretty straightforward. But no, I just think that many people are missing the abundance because they're stuck in a very selfish culture and society, and they don't even know they're fully stuck.
Yeah, I agree.
And they've made bad decisions because were not thinking right. So yeah, consequences do come in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you got to live with the consequences of a decision that was made. But God's bigger than your consequences. He's still got a joyful, thriving experience waiting for you.
Fortunately, sometimes he closes those doors that keep us stuck.
Yeah, I've had about 6 or 8 of those real slams over the years, but every one of them, I can see exactly when I look back on them, I say, man, that was how I turned left. Oh, I went right to that one. Or I was stuck for 3 months and now look what happened as a result. So I don't regret anything that's happened. If you look at it in a right perspective, it's all there's a plan.
Yeah.
So accept that plan, hit the restart, become intentional.
Well, Larry, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. I think there's just, this is kind of the deep stuff that helps us grow, as you say, kind of beyond ourselves, beyond our own selfishness. And that selfishness is very subtle in so many ways. So, thanks for sharing. Thanks for, continuing to do everything that you're doing. It's, it's a great way to live this chapter of our lives.
It is, and I'm thriving and I'm excited about it. So I hope others will join me in being a thriver.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Space for Life, and just to encourage you to share this with others, but most importantly, to kind of just put it into practice yourself, to really challenge yourself with the mindset that Larry is suggesting, that we have been given so much, and it's our joy to give and to be good stewards. So thanks so much for listening to this. Thank you, Larry, and look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Blessings on you. Bye-bye.